Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for joining our Plant Records webinar. So today we are going to talk about GIS, also known as mapping, also known as a lot of other things. And we've titled the webinar Spatial Tools in Botanic Gardens. Are we missing anything? And the background for this title is that, on the one hand, well, my background from mapping, when I go on holiday or wherever I go, I always love to have a map. In the old days, it was paper maps. Now it's a mix. And sometimes the paper map is not good enough. And often the GIS or the tools that you have on where you go is not good enough. And we think the same thing applies to plant records. And often we also see that maps are added or given to you as an afterthought. They're not sort of an integral part of the actual product that you use. They are sort of a bit as an appendix. So that causes some issues. So we're going to have some polls and questions coming through today to get a bit of a sense. We're going to have a breakout session later on as well, so that we can have a bit of a discussion about these things. So together with me today, it's Dr. Wahid. So he's going to take the main presentation. And then Greg Payton from Dawes Arboretum is joining us as well. We're going to have a bit of a discussion about high precision GNSS products as well at the end here. So, Wahid, if you can take over. Thank you.
Thanks, Harald. Yeah, and thank you everyone for joining. Good to see you all once again for hopefully an interesting webinar. So today's talk obviously on maps and spatial tools, and everyone loves a good map. I think that's obvious. And we know that maps are one of the most reliable sources for identifying the locations of plants, especially in a garden where words cannot describe the location as effectively as a map can. And we also know that maps are a very important safety net and a backup, especially when display labels and accession tags, they can get removed, they can get stolen, or they can get vandalized. I know some of you have some interesting stories of animals or squirrels eating your tags. So having a map is obviously a very important safety net. And it's also very important to the management and the inventorying process for accessions. And we also know that maps are very clear and simple communication tools for representing your plant collection. However, when it comes to maps, a lot of gardens either have them already or would like to have them. And it's always really interesting to see how effective and meaningful they can become once the basic inventory needs have been satisfied. And actually, we're going to kick off with a short poll. And we'd like to hear whether your garden uses maps for your plant records. And if so, what do you use them for? So hopefully, Harald, would you like to run that poll? Great. And while that poll is running, I wanted to share this garden map from the University of Padua from 1591 and how amazingly simple and beautiful that particular map was. Great, those responses are trickling through.
Yeah, we'll let it run for a minute, I suppose. There's still some answers trickling in. Yeah, I think we're stabilized now. So let's see what the results. Oh, there's one more. Thank you. Okay, so let's look at the results. You can see that we got, well, Wahid, you can analyze for us.
Yeah, great to see that. Well, very interesting that 25 of you, 96% do use maps. One garden doesn't, which is interesting. And what are people using them for? It's mostly sharing collection locations with staff, half of you with visitors, and a few of you for research and education, and also analysing your collection over time. So that's really interesting, very good insights, and we'll probably come back to those at the end. So thanks for that. So as you can imagine, there are a lot of benefits and advantages to having a map for your collections. And we like to think that there are three fundamental ways of absorbing your plant records data. The first is textual. So you might expect to see your plant records in a list view. There's a visual way of absorbing data. So that's through photos, videos, and things like that. And also spatial, and that's where the mapping element comes in, whether that's maps of the location of the plants in your garden, or maps of where the accession was collected from, if it indeed was collected from the wild. So when it comes to plant records mapping, these things are increasingly becoming a standard part of collection record systems. As Havard said, they're often added as an afterthought, but slowly this is becoming more integral. And mapping adds a lot more value and more efficiency in the way you manage your collections. And it's, as I said, it's very unambiguous when you've got a point on a map versus describing a plant's location with words. However, there are a lot of complex tools out there that limit the usability of maps and the adoption of maps in gardens. So we're going to just quickly run through a brief overview and evolution of plant records maps and how systems have tackled this particular problem. And you can imagine prior to the electronic story, we had hand-drawn maps. So this is a good example from Greg at the Dawes Arboretum. It's a hand-drawn map of grids and plants that have been physically measured and then drawn onto a grid. So a lot of time-consuming effort there, but dating only to 2011, so relatively recent. And then when we evolve now into electronic systems, some maps may be built upon simple garden maps. So this particular example is from Atlantis BG, which some of you may have used or come across in the past. A very simple approach to mapping accessions on a simple black and white map in this case. There might also be CAD-based systems. So these are 2D shapes on a local coordinate system, one that commonly BG map uses. So you can see some simple shapes and pins on the right there. Then you can also come across, some of you may know these complex or open source sometimes systems, for example, GRASS or QGIS, which is free, and ArcGIS, which is a subscription-based product. And these are typically more advanced systems that have a bit more complex functionality and also a lot more customizability when it comes to maps. A lot of you will be familiar with the Iris BG Garden Explorer, which brings in that visitation element, in this case, allowing maps on pins to incorporate with other metadata from your collection that can be surfaceable to visitors, allowing them to go to particular plants and learn about them in the garden. And we also have Floria, of course, where you can choose between the supplied maps from Bing or OpenStreetMap, or indeed you can upload your own custom maps as the base map. And in this particular example, you can see various pins and location markers being triangulated based on the distance from two other specimens. So there's quite a range of maps out there. And finally, we're just going to have a quick look at this web app builder system. So this is a system that is integrated with ArcGIS that the Missouri Botanical Garden plant mapper uses. And essentially it's a little bit more complex base map with different shapes for different plants superimposed with points on there. So you can see there's quite a range of tools available to different gardens with different expertise levels. So there are a lot of considerations when it comes to mapping that we're just going to quickly run through. This isn't an exhaustive list, but it's some examples that are important when it comes to mapping your collection. The first is, what is the purpose of that map? So is it being used for curatorial purposes, or whether it's particularly focused for visitation, or indeed is it focused for both? How big is your garden collection, and what are its dynamics? So how many incoming and outgoing accessions do you have? How regularly is that changing? The cost of mapping tools, which we haven't discussed today, but a lot of these products are subscription-based and they might not be necessarily affordable to certain gardens. So that is also a very important consideration. Getting the right base maps. So there are a lot of different base maps. This is the first map that you see on that view, if you like. There are free options available that are open source that anybody can access and download. You might have things like a drone map that's a bit more of an aerial representation of your garden, or you might have handmade, handmade maps that are based on vector representations. So these maps have like an infinite zoom capability. So there are lots of base map options out there. Another thing that's worth considering is how your plants are mapped based on the coordinate system. So you might have X and Y coordinates, but in places where you have plants on top of each other, for example, or epiphytes are a good example in greenhouses, where you have a Z axis also to consider. That is also a really interesting and complex problem. Of course, there's also a degree of access control. So plant records data and locations, you might not want them to be accessible to others, especially visitors that you might want to restrict locations of particularly valuable plants, or field check records that you don't want people to know about. It's important to have that also as a consideration. And finally, the accuracy of GPS within a garden. So we know gardens all around the world have different degrees of accuracy levels in terms of being able to map your locations with precision. So that's also a very important consideration when you're thinking about mapping your collections. I'm just going to pass over to Havard, who's going to have a few words about GPS accuracy within a garden.
Yeah, thank you, Wahid. Yeah, the challenge of getting accurate coordinates is, luckily when you're dealing with plant collections, often the purpose of mapping a plant is to find the plant. And that doesn't necessarily need to be very accurate, but some gardens, and particularly when you map long-lived specimens like trees, etc., the benefit of getting it accurate are multiple. You might also use the map for construction work and planning, and then the precision becomes much more important. And the challenge to get to GPS accuracy is a challenge. And just want to give you a quick sort of background of, first of all, GPS introduced by, I think in the 70s by the American, I think the Army it's a military sort of invention originally. 31 satellites going around the planet, providing sort of signals that you can then consume to give you triangulation of where you're placed on the ground. And then you can hear yourself thinking satellites. Obviously, you need to have a clear path to those satellites. So the most common problem for reduced accuracy are obstructions, or in our case, obviously trees. And so you want to map trees, and you're asking GPS to do a lot because you're actually typically then standing under a canopy. So can we improve these? Well, luckily technology has improved since the 70s. But this is important to know, and some equipment will tell you how many satellites you have in view, etc. But it's helpful for you. And the reason you often feel like your GPS is quite good on the road is, of course, the obstructions are much less, and the software will also know that you're on the road or can make assumptions of where you are. So there are a lot of challenges when you're mapping in the garden. And since GPS was introduced, there have been several improvements. There's something called enhanced GPS, which you will find on very many normal smartphones now. They will use the local cellular network, the GPS, no, the telephone networks, to enhance the signal and give you extra information about where you might be. And then later on, there was something, it's called GNSS, meaning you can use different satellite platforms and consume signals from all of them. And that's what we're going to talk a bit about, where I know Greg and the Dorsa Arboretums have had these type of equipment for some time. And then you have, instead of 31 satellites, you have 89 satellites to listen to, which will, you can see already that helps a lot in terms of getting better precision just by using that. However, there's more tools available to you if you go for something like Trimble or GeoSys Juniper, where there's something called correction services that can use local networks and local reference stations to provide even more corrections when you're out in the field. And this can then sort of improve the precision much more. So Greg, maybe you could tell us a bit about your story at the Dorsa and your recent adoption. I think you went for a Trimble R2 model. You're on mute, Greg.
Had to unmute, there you go. For years, we've used various Trimble receivers, most recently the Geo7X, which has its own built-in screen and ability to, it's like the computer system and a GPS together, but it ran on Windows Mobile style operating system, which is being phased out. So its longevity was much reduced. So just this past year, we purchased an R2, which if you can imagine the receiver, instead of being a hand, so on the photo on your right, the unit at the top of the pole there is the R2. And it doesn't have its own keyboard or operating system physically on it. You attach to it through Bluetooth and utilize an app to configure and consume the data that it produces. But we use here in Ohio, and I'm sure in lots of other states and other parts of the world, they have the various services that do a real-time correction, which means that the signal that you get from the sky is good with these units, especially when you have GNSS and lots of extra satellites to give you multiple triangulation points. But sometimes there's still some volatility in the atmosphere and some of the other issues that were outlined before. Even tree canopy can be improved with some of this technology. But these correction services here in Ohio, through our Department of Transportation, we subscribe to a free service from the state that's called VRS. That's basically a virtual, real-time correction station. So the state of Ohio has 50 or some odd, actually there's like 88 counties. There might be one in each county, but these base stations that continually know where they're at because they're in a mapped location. And then they compare that to what the satellite says that it's receiving, and they'll send you the difference based on what the sky is receiving. And then it corrects your signal nearby to counteract that. So we go from about, like I said, the signal itself is good, but we get about maybe 50 centimeters, half a meter accuracy by default. And then with the correction service turned on, it drops down to 11 centimeters. So, we're in short distance. If you can't find the oak tree within 4 inches or 11 centimeters, then it's not there. So that's the joke that I always tell. But so it's useful for high accuracy, and as Havard indicated, we also use our GPS for mapping power lines, gas lines, things like that we need to know more precisely where they are. Much more important even than finding a tree.
Yeah, great. Just for reference, we'll put up a blog article about this, how to wire this up to make it work. Because what's really great now that was not so easy 10 years ago is that when you get this Bluetooth receiver, that will then on an Android device, you can get that precision on most Bluetooth-enabled Android devices. So the device you have in your hand becomes just like a recipient of that high precision signal, and that precision signal can then pop up in Floria and in other GPS map applications. So that's really a great advantage. I know also that Shari and the San Diego Zoo team, they used the Juniper System Geode. There was some issues there with I'm not sure if they fixed that, but there's some tools, software tools that needs to basically translate the signal from the receiver onto the Android platform, and that there was a hiccup with Geode, but hopefully that's been resolved now. So
I could jump in really quick and answer Jamie's real quick question. I did fail to mention that it does require a connection to Wi-Fi or a data platform, so you can access the internet for this correction stream that I spoke of. So since we don't have Wi-Fi access all over our garden, we carry one of the little tools that converts the cell phone signal to Wi-Fi, a hotspot, and I connect to that. Another comment that I would make is on these two photos, one is right and one is wrong. The Trimble unit is over the person's head. It doesn't have to be that high over the head, but the other one, she's actually shading the antenna. So there's a blind spot where she's standing.
That's a good point. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we'll put a bit of an article. I know Rob and Ben from Edinburgh is also looking into this question, and it's sort of yeah. If you're a big garden, or you can maybe join together with other gardens, some of these equipments can be extremely expensive if you want high precision. But I think the entry level cost is doable for some institutions at least. So I'm not sure, Dave, Greg, if you have any numbers there, just to give people a ballpark what you had to invest.
Maybe Jessica would have the memory. She purchased it, but it's thousands of dollars. So
yeah, but that's because you got it at 11 centimeter, I think. Yeah. Well, we can put that in our article when we publish that, a bit more details. So yeah. Okay. Then we're going to go into a breakout room. Maybe Wahid, you could say a few things about that before we.
Yes, that's brilliant. Yeah, so we are wanting to break into a few small discussion groups, and we're going to talk about 3 themes about the way you use maps in your garden. So usability, symbology, and satisfaction. And I'm just going to share with you a sheet in the chat. Hopefully everybody can access that one. But we want to discuss these 3 themes. So are there some mapping features that you really wish you had? In that, do you have like a specific map use case in your garden that you wish you could achieve or fulfill with the use of maps that you've not been able to do today? We'd really be keen to hear about that. In terms of symbology, maps can obviously display a lot of information, but when it comes to plant records information, what would your ideal map show? So for example, life form characteristics, degree of deciduousness, for example, versus evergreen is one particular type of information that you could think about displaying on a map. Do you have any other ideas? What would your ideal map show? And finally, satisfaction. So what's the status of your records in terms of mapping? And in order to get there, what's stopping you? So what are the main pain points when it comes to mapping your plant records? So hopefully we've got some short breakout rooms organized, and we'll probably break off for, what do you reckon, 8 to 10 minutes, Howard?
Yeah, we'll do 8 minutes. So if each room could sort of elect your moderator to present your conclusions when we come back. Please can also just click on the link so you have the document in front of you when you go into the breakout sessions, so that we can see the questions before you. So yeah, 8 minutes, and then we'll get you back into the room. Thank you very much. 7 rooms, I don't know, maybe we should just go through and let each room present the sort of the conclusions, if there were any. And if we could start with room 1, where we had Greg, Christy, Martin, and Wahid.
We didn't really decide on a speaker, but we did spend some time talking about the usefulness of 3D in a map. There was a number of discussions of, especially from Martin, of orchids on a vertical wall. And looking at it from the top, you just see like rows of dots. There's really no way to tell what is where. And solutions for that would be useful if you had some way to, I don't know if the map could be turned and seen from a side view or something. I don't even know if that's a possibility yet, but some way to know what's on top of what. And I think it was mentioned in the earlier portion about if it's epiphytes on a tree or something like that, if they're on the trunk, they're going to be in the same plane vertically. So you don't know what's at the bottom and what's at the top, but that seems to be a useful addition to map usability.
Yeah, 3D maps or visualization of the third dimension somehow. Yeah, cool.
It's almost like if you had like the cab wireframe thing where you could just like rotate it, you know, and see it from the other angle or something.
Yeah. Any other comments or thoughts about the symbology and satisfaction?
I was going to say, Martin, you had a good point on the way symbols can be used, or potentially for garden planning purposes. So predictions of future sizes of plants, for example, being able to tell the shape of a particular specimen when it comes to planning a bed or planning a landscape or planning a botanic garden. So that was quite an interesting case.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Great. So we'll open up for free comments. Anything else to share, or shall we jump to the next room? Yeah. So the next room, we had Ben, Dave, Toomey, Eva Kuttner, Linda Post, and Peter Brownless, who would like to share some thoughts, if any. Did you, if anybody's speaking, I can't see it because you're then on mute.
I'll speak up. So we had quite a long conversation about the usability, about how we basically the variations in map quality that we currently had, and the ability to update a map, not just points on the map, but the actual shape files and all that sort of thing, is not readily available for us anyway at the moment. I don't know about other gardens, and some other gardens have just got one. I'm afraid I've forgotten. Embarrassingly forgotten the name, but lady in Iceland. There's only three people. Eva, that was it. 3 people at the garden, and they've just had a drone map, and they're just discussing whether to record everything or whether to record sections. So I think it's, what it's really brought over was there's an enthusiasm, but there's both skill sets and availability of the functionality of whatever system you have. So there's no perfect solution quite yet. And then we got onto Symbology, which I think was just picked up at the end of our breakout and at the beginning of this conversation. So we didn't get on to Satisfaction. I suspect that we're probably partially satisfied. That might be the way to put it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, judging from the comments, yeah, and obviously, that's really, yeah, I love the point you said about enthusiasm as well, in that but the tools are, of course, slightly, yeah, they don't meet all the requirements, but that's, yeah, that's why we're here, kind of thing. So, planning and usability, yeah. When you say shapes, by the way, do you mean as in drawing up not only borders and basically drawing the full map,
Yeah,
and also sort of ground cover planting and everything kind of thing, or?
I think it was more because, as Pete phrased it, gardens tend to be dynamic, so beds come and go.
Yeah.
But the map can't keep up with it. So the ability to basically take something like Greg uses, and instead of just using that for mapping a point, for actually be able to walk new beds and create the shapefile there and then, so it can be easily uploaded and new paths put in, things like that. So the garden map itself is representative of the real thing, as opposed to a historical record of something that was there 10, 15 years ago.
Yep.
And that's something that since IrisBG as a solution only maps points, we have to keep mulched beds and trails and things like that on our GIS. So the points are displayed on the GIS base map with the mulched beds and things. So but again, those come and go, new beds get added, plants get separated from beds and grass grows between. So it's just a constant job keeping up on the changes on the grounds for the base map as well as the plant mapping.
Yeah, I know from my experience in Sydney was that we would submit a new GIS base map to be added as a layer and then made available in Iris. So we would update once a year for each of the gardens, but we had the good fortune of working for a government department that had a whole GIS section that would do all of that base work for us. So it's not really available to everyone all the time, sadly.
Mm-hmm. I will add too that we are in the process. Jessica has been tasked with upgrading to more of a, and I forget what the term for it is now, but ArcGIS collector type of thing, where we can have more mapping done with tablets on the grounds and things, more users on the grounds, where we can physically change beds and trails and upload segments to the cloud map, so that things are more active and easily changed, rather than just one person having full responsibility of all mapping options or operations.
Yeah, fantastic, cool. That's very useful. So we can then jump to room 3 quickly here. So that was the room with Anna Florence, Rob Smith, Rob QB, and SL. So I don't know if anybody has any things to add to what has been said, or some reflections on what have been said. Rob, you're on mute.
Can't find unmute. Sorry, there we go. We started off looking at expectation. With people are now used to using their mobile phones and saying we can meet here for a coffee and dropping a pin and a point. And there is an expectation that we ought to be able to do that, to drop a pin to say where a plant is. And why can't that happen, and why does that not happen? Second thing we talked about was imports, so where the data, where the materials come from, so where the mapping materials, and often we found it's often CAD drawings, it's often CAD drawings for something else, for some building work, or for some cables coming through the garden, or so the base maps we have are often from a variety of different sources, a variety of different scales, a variety of different even types of thing, CAD drawings through aerial surveys, through all kinds of different things, and trying to coordinate those and pull them into one unified output, which is usable, is really quite tricky. And the third one is the learning curve to mapping software, be it and I'm thinking along with the GIS type software, is really quite steep, with layers and projections and turning editable data on and off, and there's quite a bit to learn, and trying to find the time to do that, and trying to remember how to do it, and trying to keep that sort of skill set current through changing software is quite a task as well. So those are the three things we discussed in our group.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So what it sort of sounds to me like you want, this is a leading question, but the desire to map everything is there. It's just the ability to do so is a difficult route.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That it's sort of yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's sort of obvious in a way, but on the other hand, it's nice to be reminded of that, because the tools are still restrictive. So you then pick the easy, least painless route, I suppose, and see what you can do with that. Yeah, great, thank you. So room 4 with Jamie, Jessica, Shari, Wolfgang, and Mr. iPhone. Or Mrs. iPhone, I'm not sure.
We didn't really pick anybody to be our spokesperson, but I kind of mediated. So anybody can feel free to jump in. I just took a few notes, and it sounds like some of us are kind of in the beginning stages of doing base mapping, and some of us are a little farther along, and still using other tools like ArcGIS and ArcGIS Online. However, there was a concern about importing that I brought up, because when we projected that data to import into Iris, we were left with a 4-foot offset that I wasn't really happy about. So I'm not sure if that was due to something that could have been fixed by our GIS person, but that was an issue that should be considered. It is hard to map with all these different systems, I agree. And collector moving into field mapping, another software application. We also have use for mapping inside of atriums, our new hummingbird exhibit, and other enclosures where we have too much bounce signal. And I've even had magnetic overload in certain areas due to raised metal walkways and air conditioning systems, etc. We were thinking in terms of the second question with record information that we'd like to display. It came up, it depends obviously on your user, but things like if you're considerate of your conservation value plants, it would be nice to be able to display if they're wild collected on the label, or if they have IUCN value, and be restrictive for the public, not showing that to the public because you're a little concerned about the plants walking away in other hands, but displaying that for your staff. Let's see. Does anybody else want to chime in? We didn't quite get to the third question about satisfaction.
I think you covered it wonderfully. And in our very brief conversation about satisfaction, my answer was sort of, eh? And I think that sort of covers a lot of people's feelings, but maybe it's just me.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. It's really nice to see that. We weren't sure about, we're not finished, but still just a comment midway here that there's a lot of talks about that. You all seem to talk about mapping, that it's like everything should be mapped. That's the sense I get. and of course plant records have tried to focus on the plants, but on the other side, they're sort of from a user perspective, you just want to have a map, and you want to have things displayed on the map, and you want to use that map kind of thing. So it's a bit like the visual or the spatial kind of discussion, a bit like a photography. But let's move on to the next room here with Peggy, Elaine, and Christopher, and JP. Do you have anything to add or to what's been talked about already?
Elaine was the most articulate, I think. We talked about how we're still kind of stuck in looking at locating something on the Google map and plunking it down instead of taking the expensive Trimble out in the field and setting that up.
Yeah, do you find that, is that a problem, or is that just something you're sort of
it's just
okay with, or yeah?
I can do it in my office and just do it, you know. Yeah.
There was a comment in our group about it's good enough. And if, you know, luckily we have staff who knows that can identify plants and know where things are. But putting a dot on the map, on a satellite map where you just moved a plant to, that's pretty easy. It's a lot easier, quicker, more efficient than getting your Trimble unit out there to do it.
One sort of side comment there that a lot of or some gardens do is to invest in the precision work for the long-lived specimens, and also use those, as you know, if there are trees there or woody specimens, and then you're mapping herbaceous and other shorter-lived plants, you use approximation, but you then have those long-lived specimens as reference points on the map already. So that can help you to sort of get sort of build up precision by proxy in a cost-effective manner. You also saw you can have used laser tools as well, which are very affordable to measure distances and do triangulation against those reference trees. So you know that all the big trees are surveyed. So that's a way to get high precision by just doing one round on sort of a lower frequency. So yeah, there's some ways to deal with that. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so any more comments from this group, or should we move over to the next one? Elaine, or yeah. Okay, the next group was Dawn, but I think Dawn, were you on your own? I saw that there was some dropouts from that group for some reason, technical reasons or others. Otherwise.
Dawn didn't have a microphone, and we were quite a low-tech breakout room, and they're only using limited mapping. There was another lady, and they're just starting to look at if they should get mapping for their arboretum. And I've only just started using mapping myself, so I think most of the points, like being able to change a base map, have been covered, and the problems of kind of mapping plants in a very small space accurately as well is another issue.
Yeah. So yeah, with the precision, is that something you wish you could have more precision, or have the really high precision equipment, or is it, have you found that balance?
I could see in some areas you're just going to be dropping dots on top of each other, so kind of the ability to zoom in and put them in relation to each other.
Yeah.
To be able to go into the mapping further.
Yeah, exactly. But that's one thing to just mention. You know, people ask how precise are the actual coordinates that you record. They're typically with 6 decimals. So that means that you know, the coordinates themselves are, I think, within 3-4 centimeters or less. I can't. It's very. You could do a potting bed or something. It's the actual coordinates you receive from the GPS that are imprecise, but the recorded coordinates are very quite precise. I think it's under 10 centimeters or something, probably less. I could look up at that, but I can't remember. So so high resolution maps, let's call it that. Then if we look at the chat afterwards, so we'll just quickly see here that the last room with Courtney, Emily, Stina, and Sinia. Do you have anything to share?
I think most of the things have already been covered by the others. I think we said that, I mean, we would love to do more mapping. We are all doing it in some ways, but there's more to learn. And we have different systems, and it could be complex to also dig into the systems and know them better. When it comes to symbols, we were talking a little bit about that, and we were talking about for internal use, it could be, for example, water regime could be interesting maybe. And also that we have, I mean, if we have accession that we move between different rooms, for example, in a greenhouse, it could be interesting to see where the plant is another day or another time of the year and so on. But then, of course, the symbols could also be very useful for visitors.
So what do you mean?
Yeah.
I'm sure I got the last one. Timeline-wise, sort of see where the plant moves over time, kind of as a like a sort of stop animation.
So here in Gothenburg, for example, we have a few plants that some parts of the year it's actually outside in the garden, and another part of the year we have it inside in a greenhouse, and that could, that's a bit tricky to how to record that into the database. So maybe symbols could be one way to do it.
Yeah, I'm just calling it nomadic plants for my own thing.
Yeah, so maybe anyone, yeah.
No, that's a typical discussion we've had many times before as well, with these large container plants that are shipped out for the season and then moved back, but you wonder where it's supposed to be in the two sort of states, when it's out and when it's in. No, that's cool. That's great. I know we're running a bit short of time now, so I wonder if we should close off. Oh, wait, we could just have a quick look at the chat, see if there's anything here. Our ability to appreciate the ability to view images in conjunction with the map. That's interesting. It's obviously constrained on the kind of screen size you have. So I should put that in here so we have it for the so maps and images. I see the point. Yeah, often you want to look for the red roses. So that makes a lot of sense. Can we label the buildings or exhibits on the base map right now in Foria? No, you can't. So that only focuses on plants, unfortunately. And then flowering time, sort of that kind of thing. Yeah, there sort of seems to be an endless. And I see here there's a question about orchids and 3D aspects. So what we'll do is we'll put these notes and see if we can summarize this in our blog article, where we also talk about a bit more, give more references to the high precision GNS equipment, so you get a bit more sense about that. But that's thank you very much. That was really helpful and very enjoyable to see all these ideas being shared. So Wahid, does anybody have any more comments and questions?
I had one, comment about the symbology, and it was one of the notes that I gave you prior to the meeting. But in reference to like your highest quality accessions, like your national collection plants or things that are of high importance, we would love to have some symbology or a way to show like after some sort of emergency, like a windstorm comes through and a tree falls, knowing where the important plants are to rescue first. We sort of, with IRIS-BG, we'll keep a task list of all the high importance plants, and then I can load that on the screen. But if there was a way that the Symbology would just add an extra character or color or something to those higher quality plants, that they would be easier to recognize.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, I remember I got reminded of that greenhouse at Smithonian with these colored reflectors on the high value plants. So you can see it in the dark with the torch. That's really, you wouldn't have that in the Arboretum, but still, yeah, wonderful. Yeah, exactly. The precision, being able to express precision. Yeah, that's something I was going to say, that I've been thinking about that a bit, to also being able to display precision in ways of symbology. Sometimes that can be helpful, that you can see that these plants are more precisely recorded than others. But sort of
that would tie into your explanation earlier about having your anchor trees that you could map off of, knowing which ones were mapped accurately and which ones weren't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I know that. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, no, we'll definitely need to try to sum up all these thoughts in some sort of form to share with you. So Wahid, would you like to close off with some?
Yeah, no,
thoughts?
it's great. No, really useful to hear those and have a discussion on those. And it's given us a good sense of which areas to explore and get our teeth into. So we'll certainly look forward to that. So thank you very much for all your contributions. And
we want to also, yeah, I'm sorry,
we'll
before, yeah, exactly, follow, but I also want to give a small plug for, we have a workshop at the American Public Art Association conference in June. So if you haven't signed up for that, please do so. We also have the June webinar, so there's going to be some more exciting things to talk about. So that will be great if you could join for that. And yeah, before that, between that time and now, in the next 3 weeks or so, we'll put up a conclusion from our talk today. But thank you so much for joining, everybody. And hopefully you have a safe and wonderful spring or autumn if you're on the southern part of the hemisphere. And thank you very much.